Hey everyone, welcome to part 55 of my Pokemon game series in Unity. So in this video, we'll write the code for using the items. So if I go to my bag and if I use a potion on this Charmander, you can see that its HP has been restored and we get this dialog over here. So if I press Z to continue, it'll go back to the item selection screen. And here you can see that the number of potion has been reduced. It was 5 before, but now it's 4 since we use one. And also if we try to use the potion on a Pokemon that already has full HP, then you won't be able to use it. So yeah, we'll implement all this in this video. Special thanks to all my Patreons for making this series possible. By becoming a Patreon, you can support me and get access to the complete project files of the series. The project files also contain some advanced features that are not covered on YouTube. So let's start the video. So first, let's fix some issues that we currently have. So in the previous video, we cleaned up our party screen a bit so that we don't have to call set party data every time we open the party screen. Instead, it'll be automatically called when any change is made to the player's party. So this is done by using this onUpdated event. So we are invoking this event whenever a new Pokemon is added to the party. Okay, but there is one more place where the player's party is updated. It'll be updated when we load the game, right? So if we go inside the player controller, when we load the game, we are setting the Pokemons of the player party. All right. So when we do this, we also have to invoke the onUpdated event. So what I'll do is I'll invoke this inside the setter of the Pokemon's property. So inside the setter, I'll call onUpdated.invoke. So now whenever we set the Pokemon's property, the party screen will be automatically updated. So next, let's look at another issue. Since you're not setting the party data every time we open the party screen, we have to make sure that the changes in HP of the Pokemon and all is reflected in the party screen. So first, let me show you the issue. So if I run the game, so let me start a battle and try to take some damage. All right. So now I've taken some damage, but if I open the party screen, you can see that it's not reflected here. So if we are not setting the data every time we open the party screen, then we have to make sure to handle cases like this. So we can handle this by using observer pattern. So let's implement that. So I'll go to my Pokemon class, and here, similar to the onStatusChanged event, I'll also create another event called onHPChanged. So using an observer pattern will make things easy in the long run. For example, when we use an item like potion, it'll automatically change the HP in the party screen. We don't have to manually change the UI every time we change things. So now we have to invoke this event whenever the HP is changed. So right now the HP is only changed from one function, that is update HP. So yeah, HP is only changed from here. So here we'll also invoke the onHPChanged function. All right. So here we also have an HP changed Boolean variable. So this is used to update the HP in the HUD. But we'll remove this soon, and we'll also use this event in the HUD also. Okay, so now we are firing this event. So next we have to subscribe to it from the party screen. So we should actually subscribe to it from the party member UI. So party screen is made up of 6 party member UI slots, and that's where we have to subscribe to the HP changed event. So we can subscribe to it from here, but first I'm going to clean this up a little bit. So I'll copy these 3 lines and I'll paste it in another function called update data. Okay, so update data will be called from here. So here we have to use underscore Pokemon since Pokemon is just a parameter. So let me do that. All right. So now I'll rename this function to something like init, because if the function name is set data and then if you're doing things like subscribing to an event, that doesn't make sense, right? So I'll call this init instead. And from here, I'll subscribe to the on HP changed event. And when this event is fired, we just have to set the HP, but I'll just simply call update data function since that'll set the HP for us. So yeah, it doesn't matter if you want, you can just use a lambda and set just the HP. So now whenever we change the HP, it should also be reflected in the party screen UI. So let's go ahead and test this now. Okay, let me start the battle real quick. Let me try to take a damage. Okay, so now if you go to the party screen, you can see that the change is reflected here. So that is working fine. So with these issues fixed, let's start implementing using items. So if I select an item and if I select a Pokemon from the party screen, we should use that item on the Pokemon. All right. So to implement item using, I'll go to my item base script. So this is where I'll create the use function for using the item. So here I'll create a function called use. So this function is going to return a boolean, and this will indicate whether the item is used or not. Sometimes you won't be able to use the item. For example, if the Pokemon's HP is full, then we won't be able to use the potion. So in such cases, we'll return false. So the use function will not have any implementation inside the item base class, but it'll be implemented in the subclasses, right? So we'll make this function virtual so that they can be implemented from the subclasses. And in here, I'll just return false so that we won't have any error. So we won't call item base.use directly. We'll be calling it from the subclasses. So it doesn't matter what the implementation is over here. So now let's open up our recovery item script. So in here, we will override the use function. So if you type override and hit space, it will show you the functions that you can override. So basically we can override all functions that are virtual in our base class. So that's why you can see use over here. So I'll just override the use, and in here we'll write all the logic for using a recovery item. So let's start by implementing a simple item like potion, and let's make sure that works. And after that, we'll implement the rest of the items. So for potion, there will be an HP amount. So I'll check if the HP amount is greater than 0. If so, we can use the potion and restore the Pokemon's HP. And by the way, there is one thing I missed. The use function should take Pokemon as a parameter, and that will be the Pokemon on which the item should be used. Okay. So let's add Pokemon as a parameter. So first I'll add it to the item based script, and then I'll add it here also. Okay, so now we can restore the HP of the Pokemon by HP amount. But before I do that, I'll check if the Pokemon's current HP equal to its max HP. Okay, so if this is the case, that means Pokemon's HP is already full and we don't want to use the potion on that Pokemon. So here I'll just return false and we won't use the item. Otherwise, if there is some HP that we can restore, then we can try to do that. So to update the HP, right now the only function we have is update HP. So if you look inside this function, this actually takes a damage and it reduces it from the HP. But in our case, we want to add a value to the HP, right? So an easy way of doing it would be to pass the HP amount as a negative value, but that might be confusing to read later. So what I'll do is I'll actually rename this function to something like decrease HP. Okay, that makes more sense for this function. And I'll make a copy of this function and create another one called increase HP. So in the case of this function, I'll rename the parameter to something like amount, and we have to add the amount to the HP, right? So now we can call this function to increase the HP. So let's do it from here and restore the HP of the Pokemon by HP amount. All right, so using this, we should be able to create items like potions and super potions and all. So we have an error here. That's because we are not returning anything from this function. So let's just return true from here. All right. So now we have a function to use the item. So next we should actually call this when the player selects an item and a Pokemon from the inventory UI. So let me open up inventory UI, and here when we select a Pokemon to use the item on, right now we are not doing anything. So from here we have to call item.use, right? So I'm not going to call item.use directly. Instead, I am going to create another function inside our inventory. So this function will be called use item. So this will take the selected item and selected Pokemon as the parameters. So for the selected item, we only have the index of the selected item. So here I'll take an integer for the index of the selected item. Okay, and then I'll take another parameter for the selected Pokemon. So now first we have to get the item from its index. So I'll say slots of item index. Why did I name it index item? It should be item index. All right. So this will give us the item slot at this index. And then we can just say dot item to get the actual item. And I'll just store it in a variable called item. So next I can just call item.use, and to this function we have to pass the selected Pokemon. Okay, so remember this function actually returns a boolean, so let's store that in a boolean variable. So now we are using the item. So next, if the item is used, then we should remove or decrease its count from the item list. So I'll check if the item is used, and if it's used, we should remove that item. So for that, I'll create another function called remove item, and this will take the item that we should remove. So to remove the item, actually we won't be removing the entire slot of the item. Instead, we'll be just decreasing its count, right? For example, if there are 5 portions, then we'll just decrease its count and make it 4. So first we need a reference to the slot of the item. So we can get that by using slots dot first. So to use first, you have to import the link namespace. So we have to get the first slot in which the item is equal to the item that we want to remove. Okay, so I'll just throw this slot in a variable. All right, and we have to reduce the count of the item in the slot. All right, so we can get the count by item slot dot count, and I'll just decrement it by 1. Okay, so I'm getting an error. We can't decrement this. So when we write the property like this, it'll only have a getter, and we need a setter to actually change its value. So I'm going to define the property like this, and I'm going to define both the getter and the setter. All right, so now the error should be gone. So we are reducing the count of the item, and once we reduce, if the count becomes 0, then we can remove that slot entirely, right? So I'll check if item slot dot count equal to 0, and if that's the case, I'll just remove the slot from our slots list. So I'll say slots dot remove, and I'll pass our item slot. Okay, so this function will remove the item for us. So let's call it from here, and let me just pass our item. So now we have the function to use the item, but there's one last thing I want to do. I want this function to return the item that is used. So this will return a item based instance, and if the item is used, then we can simply return the item, and otherwise we'll just return null, indicating that the item is not used. So returning the item used will allow us to show dialogues like the player used potion. So that's why we are returning this. So now let's call this function from the inventory UI. Let me bring it over here. All right, and in the onSelected, I will call inventory dot use item. So for the item index, we can just pass the selected item variable. All right, and for the selected Pokemon, how can we get that? So if you look inside our party screen, oops, all right, here you can see we have a property called selected member. So this will return the member that's currently selected in the party screen. So let's go ahead and use that for the selected Pokemon. So I'll say party screen dot selected member. So now let's go ahead and test this, and hopefully it should work. Okay, so right now all my Pokemon has full HP, so I won't be able to use a potion. So first let me reduce the HP by starting a battle. Okay, so yeah, I've reduced my HP a bit. So now if we look at our party stream, the Charmander has lost some HP and we can try and use our potion to restore that. So before I restore, let me go ahead and save the game. So this will allow me to test the potion again and again, and I won't have to start a battle and take damage every time for testing the potion. So now let me try to use the potion. So I'll select potion from here and I'll select this Charmander. Okay, so now you can see it has restored the HP of the Charmander. So if you go back, okay, this is not updated. It was 5 before, so after using the potion it should be 4. So there is some issue in the code. Let me check. So the issue is we are changing it from the slots list. So we are changing it from here, but we are not actually updating that in the inventory UI, right? So here we have a function called update list. So we can use that to update the list in the UI. So we can call that function from the remove item function, but we don't want to create a dependency to the UI class. So what I'll do is I'll use the observer pattern just like we did before. So here I'll create an event called on updated. Okay, and when we remove the item, we can invoke the on updated event. So next we have to subscribe to this event from the inventory UI. So in start, I'll subscribe to inventory dot on updated event. And when that event is fired, I'll call the update item list function. Okay, so that should update the item list for us. So let's go ahead and test this. So I'll just load my last save so that some HP will be reduced from my Charmander. So now let's go ahead and use the potion on the Charmander. Okay, so it restored the HP. And if we go back, you can see that the count of the item has been reduced to 4. Alright, and by the way, if we try to use the potion on a Pokemon that has full HP, then we won't be able to. So I press Z, but you can see that the item is not used and the count is still 4. So next, we should show a dialog when the player uses an item. So if the player uses a potion, then we should show a dialog like the player used the potion. So let's go ahead and implement that. So from our inventory UI, once we use the item, we should also show a dialog. So let's take a look at our dialog manager script. So in here, we have a function called show dialog, but you can see that it takes a dialog object as the input. So this function is used to show multiple lines of dialogues. And after showing each line, if we press Z, then it'll show the next line. So in our case, we just want to show a single line of dialogue. So we don't want to create this dialog object and all that. We just want to pass a text and show that. So let's create another simple function for this. So this function, I'll call it show dialog text. And this will also be a coroutine. Okay. So this function will take a string instead of taking the entire dialog object. So the implementation of this function is going to be pretty similar to this one. So first I'll set is showing to true so that other components can check if the dialog is being shown or not. So we don't need any of these lines. Since it's just a single line of dialog, we don't have to cache anything. We can directly make the dialog box active and call the type dialog coroutine to actually type the dialog. So I'm going to make the dialog box active first, and then I'll call the type dialog coroutine. All right, so to this, I will pass the text input, and I'll use yield return here since we want to wait until the dialog is complete. Okay, so next, once the dialog is complete, we can go ahead and make the dialog box inactive. And after that, I'll just set is showing to false. All right, so this will show the dialog, and after showing it, it'll go ahead and hide the dialog box. So there's one more thing I want to add to this. I don't want to hide the dialog box as soon as the dialog is complete. Instead, I want to wait for the player to press the Z key, and only after that, I'll close the dialog box. Okay, so this will give the player enough time to read the dialog. So we can do that by using another coroutine. But since we might not need this in all cases, I'm going to add a Boolean parameter called wait for input, and I'll set it to true by default. So if this is true, then we have to wait for the player's input before closing the dialog. So here I'll check if wait for input is true. And in that case, we should wait for the player to press the Z key. So I can do that by using the wait until function. So to this function, I'll pass a lambda, and this lambda will return the value of input dot get key down, and it'll check for the Z key. All right, and since we want to wait until this happens, we have to use yield return. All right, so this line of code will make the function wait until the player presses the Z key. All right, so next let's call this function to show the item used message. So from the inventory UI, after the item is used, I can call the show dialog text coroutine that we created. But what I'll do is, instead of calling the coroutine from here, I'll put all the logic to use the item in a separate coroutine so that we can wait until the show dialog coroutine is complete. So I'm just going to cut this, and here I'll create a new coroutine called use item, and let me paste the code to use the item here. So once we use the item, this function will actually return the used item. So let me store that in a variable. Okay. And if the used item is not equal to null, then it means an item was used. So I'll call dialog manager dot show dialog text function, and we can simply show a text like the player used this item. So I'll get the name of the item from used item dot name. So one thing you can do is, if you want, you can add a custom use message for each item. So along with name and description, you can also add another field called use message or something like that. So for the portion, the use message will be something like restore the HP, and for ether, it'll be like restore the PP. So yeah, you can use a separate field for that, but I'm just going to keep this simple, and I'll just simply show a message like the player used the item. So next, in the else of this condition, if it comes to else, it means used item is null and the item was not used. So in that case, we can simply show a dialog like it won't have any effect or something like that. And by the way, since we want to wait until this function is complete, we have to use a yield return. Okay, let me also put it here. So now we'll show the dialog after the item is used. So after that, once the dialog box is closed, we can also go back from the party screen to the item selection screen. So we already have the close party screen function for doing that. So let me call that. Okay. So there is one last thing that I want to do. At the start of this coroutine, I want to set the state to inventory UI state.busy. So this will just make sure that the player won't be able to spam the Z key and use the item multiple times. All right. So let's go ahead and call this function from the on selected action. So I'll use the start coroutine here, and I'll call the use item coroutine. Okay, so let's go to Unity and test this. So one thing you have to do before you test is you have to make sure that the dialog box is below the inventory UI. So if I make the dialog box active right now, you can see that it's not visible. That is because the inventory UI is on top of it. So if we bring this down, now you can see that the dialog box is on top of the inventory UI. So we'll keep this here, and let's just disable this by default. And let's test the game now. So again, I'll load my last save so that I can test the potion on Charmander. So this time let's just try using the super potion. So if I use it on Charmander, you can see that this message will be shown. And if I press Z, I'll go back to the item selection state. So let's also test the other case. So if I try to use it on a Pokemon with full HP, then I'll get this message and I won't be able to use the potion. So here you can see the count is still 1. So awesome. Now we have the code for using items. So next, we just have to write the implementation of all the other types of items. So that's going to be pretty easy, and I'll be doing that in the next video. So thanks a lot for watching, guys. If you found this video helpful, please leave a like and consider subscribing to my channel. That'll really help me out. So I'll see you in the next video.